Hello, everybody, and welcome to Mastering Life Shorts webinar 31. Today, we're going to be talking about an analogy of how to think about stress called the stress bucket. So let's get straight into that. So first of all, what is stress? So it's a feeling of emotional or physical tension caused by something called a stressor. I mean, this seems obvious to everyone, but it's useful to unpick it before we go in further. The stressor could be something outside your body, like an event, something that happens to you, or it could be internal. So if it was an external event, for example, I don't know, you're driving to work and someone overtakes you in a bad way, that would be an external event. An internal stressor might be, I don't know, the fear of the future or worry about something that it's coming within you. There are two types of stress. There is acute stress, and acute stress is when you're feeling it in the moment. So that's the kind of thing that you would feel if you were driving. Whereas chronic stress is a longer term condition, and that's the stuff that can be very debilitating, particularly in the workplace. Now, stress isn't actually a bad thing, and I've shown this this arc before in a previous webinar. If you don't have enough stress, then you can just become a little bit too comfortable with where you are. You start becoming more creative with a little bit more stress, and then you become more energetic, and you get to a peak when you have the right amount of stress. And it's one of the reasons that I do these talks as webinars, as well as putting them on YouTube. If I was just sitting here in front of my camera with no one live, then I wouldn't have that little bit extra stress that I have, knowing that I can only do this once and get it right once, and it all has to come out. If you get more stress than that, though, then first of all, you become tired, and then your mind starts getting too fuzzy, and then you just get irritable and burn out. So the kind of thing that happens with this, it pushes you over and you're not able to perform. So it's good to have some stress in our lives. Now, what's this stress bucket thing? So the stress bucket is an analogy that helps us understand the amount of stress that we have in our lives and whether it is too much, too little, or stress, and where it's coming from and where it's going. Now, the idea is that everyone is born with a stress bucket. Some people seem to be able to take huge amounts of stress throughout their lives, so they feel like they've got a massive stress bucket. Other people seem to have a very small stress bucket, and it easily overflows. So you have to cope with the fact that you have a stress bucket, and it doesn't seem that it's possible to change the size of your stress bucket. So if you imagine that you have a bucket, so like a normal bucket, the ability to deal with stress is the size of the bucket. If you have a stressor, something that causes you stress, it will start to fill the bucket. So what are stresses? Well, I helped my parents to move house the other day. They say that's one of the most stressful things. If you're overworked, then that's definitely a stressor. Tiredness can be a stressor. Relationship problems can be stressors. All of these things can be stressors. When you have stressors, it's like the stress in your bucket is moving up. The water level in your bucket is moving up. And that's fine to a point, because you should, as I said, adding to the stress can be great. But it all goes wrong if your bucket overflows. So taking last week when I was helping my parents to move house. It was in the middle of pandemic. There's various health issues involved. There's people all over the place. There's removal men. There's boxes everywhere. And everyone was feeling huge amounts of stress. And I saw it on the morning of the move. Suddenly we had put out a cardboard box to use as just a rubbish bin. And my mother suddenly flipped. And she suddenly started stressing over the fact that this cardboard box, which was an old used box, didn't have a plastic bag in the bottom to use as a bin bag. and I saw her stress just flowing out. And this is the thing, that it wasn't that filled her stress bucket, is that her stress bucket was already full, and just a little bit on top made it flow out. And we all have these things in our life where we suddenly see our stress bucket overflowing, because of something very, very small. There are three things that happen when that happens. We can run away from situations. So the flight, we can fight, we can be angry, or we can freeze. So in the case of the filling up the bag, and there was no bag in the cardboard box for my mother, it became an anger, and she started rushing all over the place trying to find something and getting very agitated. It happened to me just before Christmas. I was going on holiday with my boy, and we were going to the Canary Islands. And to go there, you needed a COVID test. And I had been up all night waiting for my results. They had my boy had already got his result, and I was waiting for my result from the lab, and they lost it. So I drove my boy to the airport. I was tired, I was upset, I was stressed. I'd already had long conversations with the airline about why I was not going to have to pay for a new flight when they had put things in place that made it very difficult. I was really upset. And then someone came too close to me in the coffee shop queue, as I was waiting for a coffee after I dropped off my boy. And I lost it. I shouted at him, "You're standing too close to me in the middle of a pandemic." And everyone in the coffee shop just turned around and said, "Just cool it, mate." And yeah, I overreacted. But what had happened was my stress bucket had overflown. So I was in that fight of the fight, flight, freeze. I then went home, and I spent the rest of the day in bed. And I just sat there watching absolute rubbish on TV for the rest of the day. And my body was just in freeze mode. So my stress bucket just allowed me to, it overflowed, and it came out as that freeze. So we all react in different ways when our stress bucket overflows. If you've got a small stress bucket, this is going to happen really quickly. If you have a big stress bucket, it will happen in time. I happen to have a very big stress bucket, but it does happen now and then, and it can overflow for everyone. And it's not a bad thing. This is natural. Now, we want to reduce the amount of stress in our stress buckets. And how can we do that? Well, we need to find ways of de-stressing ourselves. So just getting some time to ourselves, moving away from everything, that will reduce our stress bucket. Sometimes intimacy or physical touch or sex even can reduce our stress. Yoga or meditation can reduce our stress. Exercise can reduce our stress. All of these things can reduce our stress. And as we allow our stress bucket to empty, then we're giving us more space for the next day, or for the stress bucket to let go before it overflows. Now, one of the ways that I reduced my stress during that move 2 weeks ago was by doing this presentation 2 weeks before. I normally do the presentations about a week in advance. I happen to do this one 3 weeks in advance to make sure that I knew it was gone. It was one less thing off my to-do list, in order that I could get back from the move. I knew I would have things that had come up at that time, and I had clients for coaching and all the rest of it. And because of that, I didn't want another thing to have to do in a rush. And that really helped me in that time to then move forwards with my stress. And sometimes we can plan our stressors, and get them out of the way beforehand, so they don't fill our stress buckets at the wrong moment. Other times we can't do that. So sometimes we just have to recognize that our stress bucket is starting to fill up, and say, you know what? It is so full that if I don't take some time out, go for a walk, have lunch, or whatever it is, get myself out of a situation, then it's going to overflow. Sometimes we're so stressed, we don't notice that our stress bucket is about to fill up. It's almost like we're so in the middle of it. And that's when someone else has to come to us and go, look, you need to move out of this situation. That's exactly what happened with my mother the other day. I saw this going on and I just said, Mum, I'm moving you out of this situation. You're stressed. There's people all over the place. Stop. Go and have a cup of tea. And she was very angry with me for a couple of minutes, but actually she then calmed down. And that's the thing. So if you're in a workplace situation, you see someone's stress bubbling up, you sometimes just need to stop them, calm them down, empty that bucket a bit, and then they can feel better. Now, we have to be a little bit careful. Some things that we think are emptying our stress buckets actually just go round in a loop and refill them. So the obvious ones are if we binge eat really crap food, if we drink alcohol, or if we use drugs. They're all false de-stressors, because actually you end up feeling fat the next day, or you have a headache the next day, or you've lost money, or whatever it is, and they will actually just increase your stress bucket in the long term. So we have to be really careful of these. There's also things like watching rubbish on TV, that if they're used carefully just as a, I'm going to relax myself, that's fine. But if we're using them as a numbing strategy, so we're trying to avoid the stress, then that can be negative in itself. Trauma is something else that is worth thinking about in the stress bucket. I see trauma as having a rock inside your stress bucket. So if something has happened to you, someone drops a rock in and it reduces your stress bucket size. Now, you can learn to cope with that moving forwards and just say, you know what, I know that I have a smaller stress bucket than everyone else. I know it goes over quicker. So I'm going to make sure that I build in self-care time, relaxation time, exercise, whatever it is. I'm going to reduce the stressors coming into my life, and then I'll cope with it. But if you were to go to counseling or therapy or something to try and reduce the size of that rock, then it will mean that you are more likely to be able to cope if stress suddenly comes in unexpectedly into your life. So the important thing here is to recognize that we all have stress buckets. They're perfectly natural. They're there for a reason. They tell us that everything is going wrong, but generally too late. You know, when we were in the savannah and about to be eaten by a lion, our stress bucket overflowed and it told us to get out of there. That's really good. It's natural. However, in the everyday life, we have so many stressors coming in that sometimes we need to just be really aware of that. And once you start to become aware of it, you can do something about it. And once you become aware of other people's stress buckets, you can help them to cope with their stress better. So it doesn't go from acute momentary stress to chronic long-term stress. And one of the things about chronic stress is it actually has a physiological effect on the body, because what happens when you're stressed is you get filled with adrenaline, and that actually pumps your heart too hard, and it can actually have long-term health effects on things like heart disease and your healing processes, because if you're stressed, you're less likely to heal from illnesses, for example. So we can help people by helping them understand this analogy, or ourselves, and making sure that whatever goes in also comes out. Now, in order to help you, as always, I put together a worksheet. What I ask you to do in the worksheet is to do a diary of your stress. And you can do this in one of two ways. One, you can set a timer that every couple of hours you write down how you're feeling, and then you start to recognize where your stress bucket is and the events that cause that to happen. Or you can just recognize when your stress bucket changes and make a diary of that. You then start listing all the stresses in your life, and then you think about what relaxes you in your life, and then you can move forwards. Now, with always, this might be something that is fine that you want to do on your own, or it may be something that you would benefit from talking to someone else about. If you have chronic stress, that's when you need to go to a counselor or to a GP, a doctor, in order to get help. If you've just got acute stress, but it's happening at the wrong time and you can't work out how to reevaluate your life, that's when a coach, whether a life coach or an executive coach, really works. So get in touch. Hit the button for a free experience coaching session. We can talk about stress in your life or managing the stress of those people around you. Next week, we're going to be talking about marshmallows. So there's a classic experiment about deferred gratification involving marshmallows. And I'm going to be talking about how if you choose to take one marshmallow immediately or two marshmallows in a couple of minutes' time, that has an effect. If you're a kid, it can prove what your retirement is going to be like. And how we can deal with deferred gratification in our adult lives, whether we would have chosen one immediate marshmallow or two marshmallows in a few minutes' time. So I'm looking forward to talking about that. See you all soon.